to Story Power, a bi-monthly podcast where my guests and I chat about stories and creativity in all different styles and formats. My name is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, and my goal is to promote what Dale Carnegie stated in his famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. He said, instead of condemning people, let's try to understand them. Let's try to figure out why they do what they do. That's a lot more profitable and intriguing than criticism, and it breeds sympathy, tolerance, and kindness. To know all is to forgive all. It's my firm belief that the goal of most creative people is to try to understand themselves and others. That's what makes artwork of all kinds so compelling. But more than that, the personal stories of my guests promote understanding as well. Roger C. Schenck, a cognitive scientist, said, human beings are not ideally set up to understand logic. They are ideally set up to understand stories. It's my hope that Story Power will help us understand each other better by sharing the stories of my guests. Hello, Story Power listeners. This is episode 100. And we had a little bit of a snafu with my guest, and we had to withdraw the recording. So I am going to have a Lucinda special, the first one ever. And this is about stories and sites that I really like and I'm going to recommend to you. The first site I want to recommend, it's actually a YouTube channel, a Patreon community, and they have a website. And it's called Cinema Therapy with Jonathan and Alan. And Jonathan is a licensed therapist. Alan is a filmmaker. And what they do is they pick a movie and they analyze it. They talk about it from the point of view of what the characters are going through, what they've learned or not learned, and what we can take away from it. Now, I love this site. I just found it a few days ago. The reason I love it so much is because they analyze movies the way I do. Now, I learned to analyze movies from my father, who's not a filmmaker or a therapist, but he understood human nature really, really well. And that's what these two guys do, is they're pointing out the ups and downs and good things and bad things about human nature that are reflected in the movies that they're talking about. So the very first thing that I saw that they did was a 2-part series about the television show Ted Lasso, which happens to be a favorite in our household because it has a lot of really great lessons about how to be a good human being. And of course, the characters go through ups and downs and they make mistakes and they have relationship problems with each other, but overall, it's a really great show. So go find Cinema Therapy, Jonathan and Alan on YouTube, and their website is cinematherapy.com, I think, and they also have a Patreon community. So I plan on joining their Patreon community because I love talking about movies. I miss talking about them with my dad, who's no longer with us. He and I used to do that when I was in high school. I'd come home from a game. I was on the pep club, and sometimes I'd stay up really late on a Friday or a Saturday night watching a movie, and sometimes Dad would come out and watch with me. Or on Sundays, after my brother and my father were finished watching the basketball game or the baseball game or the football game, I would watch a movie at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and on Sundays. And my dad would watch them with me and we would talk about them. So, if you've got somebody to talk about movies with, that is so great. And I suggest Alan and Jonathan because they're friends, longtime friends, and they're really funny. Okay, so the next one that I want to suggest to you is this one is a podcast called What Should I Read Next? And it is one that I started listening to probably about 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. And Anne Bogle is the host. She's kind of a story whisperer. Now, this one is all about books. But what she does is she will have a guest on. It's just an ordinary, regular, everyday person most of the time. And she will ask the guest to tell a little bit about themselves and then tell about 3 books they love, one that they don't, and what they're reading now. And then she suggests 3 books for them to try based on what they've said they like and don't like. And most of the time, I think the guests really like her suggestions. She also has a blog on her website, Modern Mrs. Darcy. And What Should I Read Next is also a Patreon community that I subscribe to. And they do all kinds of cool book events. Like they're just about to unveil their summer reading guide. They have a winter reading guide too, I think, and maybe a fall one. They'll have all kinds of special recordings. The one that is up right now is Anne's husband is talking about books that take place outdoors or about the outdoors or adventures out in the outdoors. So that's a really great one to check out too. Neither of those Patreon communities are very expensive. They're like, you can get them for $2 or $3 or $4 or $5 a month. Okay, so I highly recommend Anne Bogle's What Should I Read Next if you're a book lover. I have to say my to-be-read list is now so long, mostly because of her, but also because of my Story Power guests who are writers. And so I'm going to segue to some books that I have learned about and read because of my guests. The latest one is Judith Starkston, and she is a classically educated woman. She had to learn Greek and Latin. She knows a lot about the ancient world. And for some reason, she was taken by the Bronze Age culture, the Hittite Empire. And so she's written a 4-book series, starting with The Priestess of Ashana, that is historically accurate. It's based on some actual people. She had to change the names, though, because Hittite names are really difficult to pronounce. But there's also magic involved in the books. So I've just finished reading the 3rd book. The 4th book comes out on May 7th. This is airing on May 8th. So you can go get the book right away if you want to and read all 4 of those. They're really, really interesting, especially since the main character is a priestess and a queen who happened to be quite prominent in the Hittite Empire. Now, the time period that this takes place is, just to give you a perspective, is when Ramses II was Pharaoh of Egypt. Ramses II, you might remember, is the Pharaoh that Moses finally got him to say that the Israelites could be free. So that gives you a little bit of context. The Hittites and the Egyptians had a battle at Kadesh, I think it was, which is a famous battle, and it was sort of a draw, although Ramses declared that he won. But it was a draw, and so it was one of those situations where they kind of had a Cold War going, and they couldn't really defeat each other, so it was always this balancing act between the two powers. So that's part of the story as well, is the Egyptians, and although the names are all changed for the countries, but the Egyptians and the Hittites. So go check that out. I am really into this trend now. Speaking of Judith and her Bronze Age series. She and I were talking when we were recording for Story Power about this trend of books that have come out that mostly focus on the women of the Greek and Roman myths. And a couple of the authors that you might want to check out are Madeline Miller. I read her book Circe. Now, most of these women that these authors are writing about are sort of side characters in the Greek and Roman myths. But Circe, the book by Madeline Miller, is really good. I've read it. And then I just recently found one called Lilith by Nikki, Nikki Marmory. And Lilith, if you don't know, was the first wife of Adam in the Garden of Eden. And the thing that, now I won't say this exactly right, but the thing that I just hooked me right away on the book was it opened with Lilith saying something like, I should have known that trouble was coming when Adam started to think. Or maybe it was when Adam started to plan. And Lilith, it was her idea that she and Adam were supposed to be living and planning life in the Garden of Eden as equals. They were supposed to be equals. But once he started thinking and planning, he wanted to be superior to her. Well, she wasn't having any of that. And so God, Yahweh, or the God of the garden, kicked her out of the garden. Now, Lilith was conceived and brought into life by the goddess, and I think her name is Ashana. Correction, the goddess's name is Asherah, and she is God's wife. Not only that, she's God's equal. And before she got kicked out, she noticed that Asherah was missing. She wasn't having any conversations with her. Now, one of the things about Lilith is she had gone and eaten of the fruit of the tree of life and the fruit of the tree of knowledge, unbeknownst to Adam and to God. So when she was kicked out of the Garden of Eden, she was already immortal, and her mission was to go find out what happened to Ashana. Now, she was aided in this by, and I cannot remember his name, but by a fallen angel who had fallen in love with her the minute he saw her. And so he helps her on and off throughout the book, but mostly her mission is to find Asherah and return balance between the sexes to the earth. When she finds Asherah, she's in the underworld, and she has been tortured for centuries, unfortunately, by her sister, who is the queen of the underworld. Now, when Asherah and Lilith come out from the underworld, Asherah is dying. And she tells Lilith, you need to help restore balance to the world. And one of the ways that you need to do that is to encourage the humans to become their own gods. Now, I have to say, when I read that, I was a little bit uncomfortable. But then what I realized was, all religions are man-made institutions. What I think Asherah was trying to say to Lilith was, we need to realize that we have direct connections to the divine, and that we are an aspect of the divine. And that's what Lilith was supposed to try to encourage people to understand. And the book ends in this really great way. She meets up with a lot of wonderful women, historical figures throughout the book. Mary Magdalene, Jezebel, Noah's wife, and others. And so what the book's message is, the patriarchy is making things go way out of balance, and we need to come back into balance. It's a great book. I loved it. Another one that Judith suggested, another author that she suggested to me, is Natalie Haynes. And Natalie has written about 5 books that are based on Greek goddesses or Greek figures in history, like Medusa is one. And then she has one that has all of the goddesses like Hera and Aphrodite and Athena. And there are probably others that I'm not remembering. And so I want to read those books because we need to reframe the female characters in fairy tales and in the myths. They're probably a lot stronger than we ever give them credit for. And talking about fairy tales, there have been a lot of fairy tales that have come out recently, books and movies where it's turning the old fairy tale tropes on their head. One that I saw recently was Damsel, and it starts off with the damsel saying something like, there are a lot of stories where the brave knight saves the damsel in distress. This story is not one of those because she has to save herself. And I love stories where the women save themselves. And I'm going to talk about some classic movies where that happens. But, there are some fairy tale tropes too where the women save themselves. Ever After with Drew Barrymore is like that. The prince comes to save her, but she's already saved herself, before they get married. And let's see, Beauty and the Beast is like that. She's the one who goes to save her father. I'm talking about the live action one with Emma Watson and Dan Stevens, and who plays her dad. And she goes and saves her dad, and then it's her love that saves the beast. So there are some really interesting female-driven stories out there now. And I have to say that for the last 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 years, almost all of the books that I read are written by women with female protagonists. So I love that. Okay. The next thing that I want to talk about are some television shows that I think are really great, female-driven. Well, of course, I don't want to forget about Barbie, but everyone's talking about that one, so I don't need to talk about that. If you haven't seen it, go see it. It's a fantastic movie. But a television show that came out not too long ago, and both of these are on Apple Plus. Lessons in Chemistry. It's both a book and a television series. I have not read the book yet because I've been busy reading books by my podcast guests. So I'm hoping to read that one sometime soon. But the television series with Brie Larson is fantastic. And I highly recommend you go watch that. Another one that I thought was really great was Silo. That's also on Apple Plus. But there are a lot of really interesting female-driven stories out right now. Rebel Moon is kind of interesting. Constellation was interesting. There are just a bunch of really interesting female-driven stories out there right now. Now, I happen to love classic movies. Haven't found a YouTube channel or a website or a podcast that talks almost exclusively about classic movies. I miss that because now that we're streaming, I don't get to watch Turner Classic Movies anymore. If you have cable or if you have satellite, you can still access that network without paying an arm and a leg. The only way I can access it now with streaming is to pay for Hulu Live, which is a whole bunch of money. And I'm not going to do that right now. But you can access the TCM Classic Movie Library, as I understand it, on Max. I am going to recommend 4 movies where the women go through some really difficult situations, but they end up carving out lives for themselves that in the end are very fulfilling. And the first one that I want to talk about is Now Voyager with Bette Davis, Claude Rains, and Paul Henreid. In this story, Bette Davis is a spinster. It takes place in 1942, or at least it came out then. She has a very controlling mother, who controls every aspect of her life. And at the very beginning of the movie, she has a nervous breakdown. Now, fortunately for Charlotte, she has a sister-in-law who is on her side. She's young. She's a widow. Charlotte's brother has died. And so she has kind of figured out how to not let her mother-in-law control her life. So she has found this innovative therapist, or maybe he's a psychiatrist, who can help Charlotte. And that's the first part of the movie. Charlotte goes to the sanitarium. We don't see much of that happening, but at the end of it, her sister-in-law and the psychiatrist have decided that Charlotte needs to go on a long voyage to practice her socialization skills, to practice making friends. And on the voyage, she falls in love. Now, the man is married and she knows that from the beginning, and they don't mean to fall in love, but they do. They have similar backgrounds where they've had nervous breakdowns or emotional problems. And he helps her. Knowing someone loves her helps her blossom. The next section of the movie is about her coming home and declaring her independence with her mother, who is trying to assert her control again. And fortunately, in that section, Charlotte is able to maintain her independence, but also maintain a respectful relationship with her mother. She's aided in this by a nurse. Her mother's had a heart attack before she comes home, and the nurse is on her side. So she helps Charlotte. So Charlotte has all these people who are helping her. And as the story goes along, she begins to blossom. The final part of the story is after her mother dies, she thinks it's her fault. So she goes to the sanitarium to talk to Dr. Jackwith. And who should be there but the man she loves, daughter, who is having the same issues with her mother that Charlotte had with her mom. And so she learns that if she helps Tina, then she becomes happier. She feels like she's accomplishing something. And in the end, that is what makes her life completely fulfilled, is helping someone else. So that's really interesting. And plus, I love really interesting love relationships where they're not always going to end up together, but the love is still there and it sustains them. And that's the way it is in Now Voyager. The next one I want to talk about is My Reputation. This is a Barbara Stanwyck movie. I also love Barbara Stanwyck. And it's probably not very well known. I think it might be a 1942 movie as well, or maybe it's 1943. It takes place during World War II at the very beginning. It's the day after Barbara Stanwyck's character's husband's funeral. So she is a young widow. She's only like 30 or 31 or 32 or 33 years old. She's very young because she got married when she was 17. And her mother, again, we have another controlling mother. Her mother wants her to wear black for the rest of her life. Her mother's very angry with her, but she declares, no, 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 I'm not going to do that. And, but her sons are 12, 13, 14 years old, and they're going to go off to their father's boarding school. So she is alone. It's her and her housekeeper maid. And because she doesn't socialize with her mother or her mother's friends much. And she came from a fairly wealthy set of friends who belonged to the country club and stuff. Well, she tries to continue those relationships, but one of the husbands tries to hit on her, tries to start an affair with her, which she's like freaked out about. She doesn't like him. Probably didn't like him when her husband was alive. And plus, he's the husband of supposedly her best friend. This happens to be a story where you find out who your friends are when you decide that you're going to be someone that they don't want you to be, or they don't know why you're changing. And it's a story of Barbara Stanwyck's character finding out who she really is, or who she wants to be. Because, her life wasn't really fully formed when she got married at 17. So as the story goes along, she meets a military major, I think he is, through one of her true friends who doesn't happen to be close to the others. I mean, she's probably part of the other set, but not super involved with them. And she falls in love with this guy. Well, her country club set of friends are really upset about her, and she becomes the subject of all this terrible gossip. And at some point, she decides that she's in love with him. She wants to spend as much time with him as she can, but it causes some tension between her and her sons. So she has to make a decision. At this point, who's more important, my sons or my relationship with this guy? Well, he has told her from the beginning, I'm never going to get married. But when it comes down to it, he realizes he is in love with her. He gets his orders, and I think he has to go to someplace in Japan, out in the Pacific. And but he tells her, I'm coming back. I know I'm coming back. And so her mother helps her with this. She makes amends with her sons at the end. But it's one of those situations where she realizes, this country club set of friends were never really my friends. And I don't need them. And I can be who I want to be. I don't have to rely on their friendship, because she has one true friend. And she can have more. She can make more friends. The next one that I want to talk about is Ginger Rogers. It's Kitty Foyle. And this happens to be one of Ginger Rogers' dramatic movies without dancing and without Fred Astaire. She comes from a lower class Philadelphia family. She's enamored of the upper class. She always wants to become part of this rich set. And so every year they have this big dance, big event, and it's like there's the celebrities, the Philadelphia celebrities, and lots of people stand outside the venue where they're having the dance and watch them go in. And Ginger Rogers does that when she's a teenager. And her father keeps telling her, those guys, those people, they're not, you don't want to be a part of them. They don't really understand the kind of life that we live, because They've always had things handed to them. Everything's been easy for them. So, but she's convinced that she wants to be a part of them. Mainliners, that's what they're called. So she gets a job. When she grows up, she learns to type and takes shorthand and to be a secretary. And she gets a job, and it happens to be at a magazine started by one of these mainliners. And almost everybody on the staff are his friends. And it's supposed to be this forward-thinking magazine. And of course, they have different sections of the magazine, like social events or political articles on political issues or social issues. They fall in love with each other. He wants to marry her. And in fact, they do get married. But what ends up happening is he is not honest with her. He is bound by a trust fund, a family trust. She thinks they're going to move to New York because, I forgot to say, the people who work for him on the magazine are kind of loosey-goosey, they don't understand deadlines. They don't understand what it really means to work. And so the magazine folds. And that's when she and this guy get married. Well, it's unbeknownst to his family. So he takes her home to his family, and she thinks they're going to get to go move to New York, and he's going to get a job, and she's going to get a job, and they're going to break away from his family. And she gets there to meet his family and finds out, oh no, that's not the case. And they're telling her she's going to go to school, finishing school. She's going to learn how to fit in to their rich set of friends. And she's like, oh, no. That's not what I'm going to do. So she leaves and they get a divorce, or maybe they get an annulment. But in any case, she gets a job at this really kind of fashionable boutique. And she and the woman who owned the shop become really good friends. And a few months later, she realizes she's pregnant. And she tells her boss, I'm going to have this baby. Well, unfortunately, the baby dies when she has the baby. But the woman, her boss, supports her through that whole process. And they are really good friends. And so when the woman wants to open a boutique in Philadelphia, because she went to New York, I think, to get this job, the woman wants to open a sister boutique in Philadelphia. She sends Ginger Rogers. And who should she meet but her former husband's new wife and his son. And it's gut-wrenching because the son is so adorable and her son didn't live. She's grieving still. So he finds her again and he wants to start an affair with her. Well, she's not having any of that either. In the meantime, she has met a doctor and he doesn't have any money, but he's ambitious and he has plans. He wants to start a clinic where the poor can have just as good health care as the rich. And it's this really great dream. And something happens one night when they're out on a date and he gets called to go help a woman have her baby. She can't afford to go to the hospital, so he's called to her house. So they go there and Ginger Rogers helps him with the birth. And it's this first time that she feels, it's again, helping someone makes her feel fulfilled. So she's got this decision to make. Who does she go with? Does she go back to her first husband, or does she stay with the doctor? And part of the movie, a lot of the movie, is her remembering all of the events, all of the things that happened between her and her first husband, and all of the events since they left each other. And she makes her decision. And it's a really great decision. So that is such a fantastic movie. I think it's an Oscar winner, too. Now Voyager probably is, too. The fourth one that I want to talk to you about is Random Harvest with Greer Garson and Ronald Colman. And Greer Garson is one of my favorites, again. This movie is really interesting because they're both the main character, actually. Ronald Colman has PTSD, although they didn't call it that. It's right at the end of World War I. He's in a mental institution, although he doesn't really have, his mental issue is that he doesn't have any memory. Something happened to him. He got injured in the head, and he doesn't have any memory of who he is. And that's why he's in the mental institution. He's not dangerous. He's a little bit depressed because he doesn't know who he is and he doesn't know who his family is. But the night of the armistice, everyone's celebrating the end of the war, and they accidentally leave the gate to the grounds open. And so he just walks out of the hospital and out into the street. And there's so much noise, so much, celebrating, and that he's a little bit discombobulated and afraid. And so he ducks into this shop, and the woman who runs the shop comes out and asks him if he wants, it's a cigarette shop, I think, or a tobacco shop. And she asks him if he wants to buy something, and he has a really hard time talking. That's part of his losing his memory, is he has a hard time talking. And Greer Garson happens to have seen him in the street and seen his distress. And so she has followed him into the shop. And the woman realizes, the shop owner realizes, oh, he's from the mental institution. Oh my gosh, I got to go call and get the police. Well, Greer Garson says, she's going to go call and have them come get you. Come on, I want to help you, so come with me. It happens that she is part of a theatrical troupe. And something about him, she just really likes him. And she just keeps talking to him. She doesn't expect him to answer her back, but she's just talking to him in a soothing way. And she takes him to the theater and has him sit backstage and watch the show. And while she's on stage, he faints. He's ill. And so she takes care of him for the whole week or week and a half or so, however long their engagement is in this town. And she gets him to talk. He starts to trust her. It's like she's a really great therapist, even though she's not a therapist. And they start to like each other. They don't love each other yet, but they're friends. And she gets him a job working backstage with the company, but something happens and they have to leave. He pushes somebody accidentally and hurts him. He doesn't mean to. And so it's the night the theater company is going to leave anyway. So she gets their stuff together and they get on a train and they just go to this out of the way, really small little community and hide out there. And she does call and find out that the guy that got pushed is fine. And he realizes it wasn't Ronald Coleman's fault. And he's not, he hasn't called the police or anything. And so they start this life in this little tiny village. eventually they do fall in love, and he becomes a writer, and they get married. They have a child. Right after their child is born, he's been writing freelance, but he gets an offer to be a writer on a newspaper not too far. I think it's Mansfield, maybe, or Manchester. I can't remember what town. So it's not too far away. He takes the train, but something happens and he hits his head. He has an accident. He hits his head. He remembers his previous life. He does not remember his life with her. So he comes from a wealthy family that have this high-powered business, and he goes home and finds out that his father has just died. They just had the funeral, and everybody's shocked to see him because they thought he was dead. And he takes over running the family business. Well, eventually, their son dies, unfortunately. She gets secretarial skills again, and she starts working. But the whole time she's been looking for her husband. She's hired all kinds of private investigators, and nobody's ever found him. Until one day, there's a magazine article about him and his business, and she sees the photograph and she knows it's him. So she goes, because he's looking for a new assistant, she goes and applies and gets hired, and she becomes his assistant. Now, he doesn't remember her when he sees her. He doesn't remember that he's married to her. So as the time goes on, it's been 7 years or something like that by now. He is supposedly going to marry somebody else. And so she goes to the lawyer and she has him declared dead, legally dead, her husband, whose name is John Smith. It's not his real name. And so that he's free to marry this other young woman. Well, something happens when he and the young woman are getting ready, picking the hymns. They're picking the hymns for the wedding, which is only a few days away. And something about the music makes him remember something vaguely about his first marriage. And he looks at his fiancée with this kind of blank look, and she knows immediately. She's been in love with him since she was a teenager, but she knows immediately, oh, I'm not the one. There's somebody else. And so she breaks off the engagement and goes away. And so he is asked to go into politics, but he needs a wife to help him manage the political dinners and rallies and things like that. So he asks Greer Garson's character to be his wife. And it's like a business arrangement. Now, his doctor from the asylum way back when is now her friend because she has sought him out and tried to get his help. And he's fallen in love with her. But he advises her, don't marry him. Well, she's in love with him. She's in love with who he is now, and she's in love with who he was then. So she does, but it's hard on her because it's a marriage of convenience. Slowly but surely, though, he starts to fall in love with her. And the thing that's so great about the story is it's a full circle ending because eventually he remembers the life with her at the end. Spoiler alert, he remembers who he was when they were married. So that's really great. Now, I just love classic movies. I could go on and on and on and on about them. I'd like to find a community of people that I can communicate with about them. I mean, I do belong to the Turner Classic Movies group on Facebook, but they don't they don't analyze the movies. They just talk about, name movies by this star or that with this situation. Or to me, that's fun, but it's not analyzing the movies the way Alan and Jonathan do on Cinema Therapy. And that's what I'm looking for. So if you know of a group like that analyze classic movies, because I know people who say, oh, it's black and white and it was made in the 30s or the 40s or the 50s. How can it have any relevance for today? Well, I know of a lot of movies that are classic movies that have a lot of relevance for today. Because, yes, the social situations might change, but human beings don't change. And that much. We are beginning to, fortunately, but love never changes. Commitment to each other never changes. The things that make a good relationship, healthy relationship, those things don't change. Learning to love yourself, none of those things change. You need all of those. And so that is all I really have to say today. There are so many great stories out there. Go out, find them, find the fun books to read. Even movies that seem to be really just so frivolous, like we saw Argyle not too long ago. And it's just this fun movie romp. But there are some really interesting themes in that movie. And my dad always used to say, even stories that seem to be frivolous have, yes, there's a surface theme like friendship or whatever it might be. But there are always deeper and deeper and deeper themes the more you look at the story. And that's what I always look for. Sometimes I have to watch a movie 2, 3, 4. Now Voyager I've probably seen 20 times because I used to watch it. We used to watch it in my dramatic structure class. And it was probably about the 12th or 13th time of watching it that I realized that the costumes were making a statement about Charlotte's evolution as a human being, starting with the shoes that she wore. So there's always the more you watch a story, there are always new things that you can learn from it. Or the more you read the story, there are always new things that you can learn from that story, from those stories. So that's my special Story Power episode 100. Thanks for listening, and I really appreciate all of your comments and your stars, your likes, and share it with a friend. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you heard, please share it with a friend and give us a rating and or review on your favorite podcast app. It will help people find us. I invite you to join my Patreon community at patreon.com/storypower, all one word. Or if you like, you can subscribe to Story Power on Apple Podcasts. It's my aim to build a community where we discuss the stories we love and talk about what we learned from them. I offer extra audio content and story suggestions to my patrons on both platforms. Remember, as Philip Pullman said, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. Let's spread the story love. Until next time, this is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. Thanks for listening.